We appreciate the opportunity to come here this evening. We are asked to come and present about IMEA, who we are, what we do, what our relationship is currently with the city of Naperville, and what that partnership entails. Today from IMEA, we have brought myself, Stacy Wilson. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs and Member Services. We've also brought Rakesh Kopkathu, who is our Vice President of Engineering and Energy Markets. He heads up all of our resource planning and the whole entire department. And then we've also brought our Vice President and General Counsel, Troy Folder. Rakesh and I are going to give the presentation, but we're all available for questions. So with that, I will kick us off. IMEA is a nonprofit municipal joint action agency. It's run by its members, including the city of Naperville. There are 32 communities throughout the state that are part of our joint action agency. Many years ago, in the early 80s, the municipals were finding it difficult to kind of go it alone. And to do, as the energy business got more complex and more difficult to navigate, they looked around at what other states were doing and how other munis were handling this kind of new world they were entering into. And so what they saw was that a national model is to form these joint action agencies. And so the towns gathered together and went to Springfield and lobbied the state legislature for the authority to form a joint action agency. And that is where IMEA was born. The city of Naperville has been receiving power from IMEA for roughly 15 years. And one of the benefits of the joint action agency is you have a direct voice in the power supply through your board member. And I think this is something that's fundamentally misunderstood by a lot of the comments we've been hearing and everything, is that the way that IMEA works is that Rakesh, Troy, and myself, we are staff. We bring expertise and we bring recommendations, similar to how your staff, city staff, brings expertise and recommendations to council, but ultimately the council, they are the decision makers in all of the decisions for the agency as a whole and for the resources and everything. We are staff, we bring the information, but ultimately our board members are the decision makers. And each city has a board member that represents their city. And for the city of Naperville, that's Brian Groth. And Naperville's been very involved in the agency throughout the years. So that's one thing that makes a joint action unique and one of the benefits. One of the other benefits is that we are made up entirely of municipally owned utilities. Again, we're nonprofit, so everything we do is to serve municipal owned utilities. We don't serve anybody else. They're our full-time customers. We work every day to deliver that reliable power at a cost lower than our peers. And really, we're looking to provide affordable, reliable, sustainable power. We're diversifying the way we supply it. We're investing in wind, solar, moving towards battery storage. We're going to talk more in depth about that in a minute. And significantly, we are well positioned to address any power demand growth expected in this coming decade. And our portfolio is really built to be able to keep bills low while we're looking to that future. One thing I did skip over, but I should mention, is that we are the highest financially rated power supplier in Illinois with an A+, AA-, and that is very important as we're a strong counterparty to secure any new resources. That becomes very relevant as we're trying to get new resources. So that's who we are. But we do more than just power supply. We also provide value-added, tailor-made services. And these services are really things that our municipalities have asked for and want to see. These are just a few of them. There's many more, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on each of them. Instead, I'm going to highlight maybe 3 for our purposes tonight, but I'm happy to discuss any of them if you would like. The first one is electric efficiency incentives, as well as electric vehicle and infrastructure incentives. We have a $1 million annual EE incentive program that we distribute to our municipalities based on a load ratio share basis. And so it works well to really, you guys have some local programs as well. And so taking our incentives, matching with your incentives really broadens the ability for those local energy efficiency programs. Same thing for the EV charger stations and the infrastructure there. For example, in FY 23 to 24, there was $145,000 that IMEA helped power roughly 300 new EV charger stations in the city. So that's one of the things that we do, and that's all built into our partnership. The other thing is the power supply scheduling. In our office, we have a 24/7, 365, so every day, every hour, operations center. And they have built complex modeling. They really look at weather, they look at load, they forecast how much power is needed every 5 minutes because they work in the day ahead and in the real-time markets, which are on a 5-minute basis. And they're doing it in order to ensure the most economical power supply that you can have and to optimize your portfolio. And we really get pretty granular. I mean, we are very familiar with our towns, and you know, particularly some of the smaller towns. We know their large industrial customers. We know their work shifts and when the power is going to fluctuate based on that. And we know when some really large industrial customers take 2-week breaks during Christmas, right? I mean, we really try to really utilize and model to a way that that most types of services you may not receive with other entities. And then one other one I want to highlight on this particular slide is our work in the regional transmission organizations. You're going to hear a lot about RTOs, so apologize if you're already familiar, but the way I like to kind of describe RTO, or regional transmission organization, is I liken it to an air traffic controller, right? Air traffic controllers, they don't own the airplanes, they're not flying the planes, but they are in charge of making sure that those planes land at the right place at the right time, okay? And that's really what the RTOs do with regards to power. They don't own generation resources, they don't run generation resources, but they do have the rules and the markets and everything to make sure that those that the generation resources are powering when you need them to power, so that they are that you make sure the lights are on at all the time and the grid stays sustainable. So that's really kind of just a way to visualize what their job is. And to do that, they have an increasing amount of rules and regulations. They change on almost a weekly basis. And what IMEA does is we track those rules and regulations. We engage in the stakeholder process. And we do this in a way to best benefit your resources, and also to ensure that we're meeting all the requirements that they impose, and that you as a city are meeting all the regulatory requirements that they impose as well. So those are just a couple of the different services that we offer. So what has our board asked us to do, right? And they ask staff to view everything that we do through the lens of affordable, reliable, and sustainability, and we're gonna hit on those today. And when we're talking about affordability and reliability, we're talking about predictable costs. Municipalities, part of why they wanted a joint action agency was to share the risks, share the rewards. They also were looking for, you know, steady Eddie rates, right, as best as you possibly can. And the philosophy of our members has been to try to own your resources and have your own resources, because then you have a pretty best ability to manage your risks. Okay, and the idea there is that you may not always be the very cheapest, but you are not going to be subject to these extreme market fluctuations that we're seeing, where you're going to be way higher than, you're not going to have these rapid increases. And that's part of what was going on when Naperville joined IMEA 15 years ago, or roughly 15 years ago. And so this really kind of shows it goes back to 2014. If you look at this chart, I'm going to break it down a little bit. The blue bars are the power supply costs. That's the part that we can control at IMEA. The red bars are the transmission costs. And you can see transmission costs are our largest increases that we've been having. And transmission costs are something that everyone has to pay, because the transmission you have to pay, it's basically your interstate highway, right, for power. You're paying to make sure that that power gets to your city gate. And so those are really a pass-through, and it doesn't matter which power provider you're with, or if you're with ComEd or whatnot, everyone has to pay transmission costs. So if you look at the black line across the way, going back to 2014, you can see that our power supply costs have been at or below, and we're actually well below what we were, well below today what our costs were in 2014 with regards to power supply. And we project that to continue going forward. So that, I want to also talk a little bit about, well, what is in our power supply and what do we own? And, you know, really we own a little bit of all of the above, right? We own solar, we own wind, we have ownership percentage in 2 coal-fired units, or coal-fired plants, excuse me. We have a couple of hydro facilities in a couple of our towns that we utilize for capacity, and we kind of own a little bit of everything. This is based on a name, this particular slide is a nameplate basis, so just for clarity, okay? And so we have 1,007 megawatts of resources. Of that, there's approximately 296 megawatts that are backup generations in our town, backup generation units in our towns. You don't have those here in Naperville. But the nice thing about those is that they aren't ran very often, but they do help us meet the capacity obligations imposed by RTOs. So that's one piece there. Of the 2007, we have 262 megawatts of carbon-free resources in our portfolio. So if you look at the pie chart there, that includes Prairie Wolf Solar, which is capacity. We have Lee DeKalb, which is 70 megawatts of wind. We have Green River, which is 50 megawatts of wind. We have Big River. Everything is named rivers and prairies. It drives me crazy, but that's what it is. We have Big River, which is solar. That's 25 megawatts. It's coming on in this June. And then also our hydro facilities, Royal River Hydro, and then we have several behind-the-meter solar plants in our communities. And then you can see in the hopper we have coming on 161 megawatts of resources under development. So of that, 150 megawatts is this new contract we just signed with B Hollow. It's through National Grid Renewables. And then we were really looking towards 3 more solar farms, smaller ones, approximately 11 to 13 megawatts in our communities. But we were doing those through the PACE loans, which is through USDA, which was part of the Inflation Reduction Act. So they're sort of in a hold status due to a lot of uncertainty at the federal level right now. But they are still, we're hopeful that they make their way through the finish line. This is really just a visual so you can see where the resources are geographically. These are only carbon-free resources. We didn't include everything here. And you can just visually get an idea of the geographics. And you can see right there, I don't have a pointer, but you can see that we also have the 1 megawatt facility here in Naperville as one of those. Okay, so that's what we have. Where are we going? And I think this is important. You know, our board worked together. They had a working group, and then they brought forward a sustainability plan. It was presented twice in full before it was voted on by the board in public meetings, and it has 5 principles to it. And the first one is to provide an affordable, reliable, and sustainable power supply to our member communities, to design and facilitate energy conservation programs, to offer flexible programs to mitigate peak loads. So you're really kind of looking at demand response and some other ideas there. Enable and accelerate and integrate electric vehicles and the charging infrastructure, and then maintaining a sustainable workforce. For purposes of tonight and for time purposes, I'm going to focus on the first one because I think that's what everybody seems to be focused on, is the sustainable power. But just so you know, we have the 2050 net zero vision, and the idea behind that, the roadmap, is to target reductions in greenhouse gases, and we're going to do that by increasing our renewable generation resources, particularly as we have resource contracts falling offline. So as our resources agreements, as they expire, we're going to be replacing those with renewable resources as the thermal ones expire. And then we are going to allow flexibility to embrace changes in the future. So battery storage is one. but it could be a multitude of innovations and that might come forward in the future, and we're positioned to take advantage of those, particularly as our debt gets paid off. And then we're going to continue and expand EE programs, and we're going to, we have demand response options. You actually take advantage of that. We have some of your customers that use it as well, but we're trying to get the program in a shape where more folks are interested in using demand response. And then advancing electric vehicles, which we already talked about a little bit. So inside that sustainability plan is this graphic. And really the first line focuses on how we were early adopters and what we've been doing to add renewable resources into our portfolio. The second line is sort of like where we're at right now. And then the third line there on the bottom talks about what the dates are that our current resources are going to be expiring, which is important in the conversation, right? So looking back at that top line, you can see that in 2009, we invested in a 70-megawatt wind project in Lee DeKalb. We were one of the first investors in wind. There were not a lot of investors in wind in 2009. We were really at the forefront in participating in wind project at that time. In 2016 and 2017, we put in a megawatt and half megawatt arrays. We did pilot projects in 2 of our towns, Rantoul and St. Charles. And at the time, I think they were the 3rd largest or 4th largest solar arrays. I mean, it's only, think back, that's less than 10 years ago. And that's so small. I mean, that's 1 megawatt versus now we've just signed 150 megawatts, right? So things have changed a lot, and we're moving with it. And then if you look on the middle line right now, we're focusing on trying to add more solar, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and then look and begin to try to figure out how to incorporate battery storage into the portfolio. And then lastly, you can see where we have some key dates that we're going to have to be confronting here fairly soon, some of them prior to the contract even expiring, prior to the IMEA member contract expiring. So in 2030, that 70 megawatts of wind in Lee DeKalb, that will expire at that time, that resource contract. In 2035, the Green River contract expires. In 2035 to 2038, we will have to reduce 45% of the CO2e emissions in Prairie State. That is current law. That is the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, CEJA, and we will meet CEJA. That is state law. There is no way we can do anything about that. That's what the law is. And then 2045, Prairie State will shut down under state law requirements, and then Trimble County 1 facility will be retiring. And then Trimble County 2 is expected to go offline according to PPL's, that's the corporate owner there in 2050. Just to give you a sense of the overall scope of how much that is, that's 91 megawatts, that final Trimble County, out of our 1,007 megawatt portfolio. I'm not going to dwell on this, but this was what is actually in the plan itself. And as part of that plan, the board, what they wanted to do is they said, let's make sure we have a long-term goal, right? We're going to have a goal, and our goal is 2050 net zero. And then in order to kind of make sure we're staying on target and we're not losing sight of that goal, we're going to put forward 1 to 3 year short-term actions. And then the staff has to report back to the board each year how we're doing on those short-term actions and whether we're meeting them or not, and if we're not, why not. And so that's really what the plan wanted to do, and that's what the board anticipates. Every 3 years, we're going to be going out and refreshing the plan, and we're going to reach out and do a stakeholder process with our member communities and our member board members to see what do you want the new plan to look like as we go to the next year. And I have one last slide before I turn to Rakesh here, but this was our recent report on that, and the goal number 1, again, was to provide affordable, reliable, and sustainable power supply. And the goal that the board had set was add 130 megawatts of solar, and then specifically within that, we're trying to get energized this Big River contract we'd entered into this year, and that will be occurring. And then we wanted to get 100 megawatts of solar, which is why it said 130. But we ended up finding a good project at a decent price for 150 megawatts. And so we did enter into that contract. And we anticipate that to be energized at the end of 26 or early 27. So I think it's important to note that most of these renewable projects are 20-year contracts. And so in order to enter into this, developers need certainty to borrow money, and the only way that we could enter into this contract is if we had enough members sign up for this contract extension. And since we did, and we do now have 25 members that have signed the contract extension, we were able to sign for this solar project. But had that not happened, we would not have been able to do that. We do have enough now members signed to be able to make that decision. And then we have 3 new member projects that are going in and will be going online this year in Princeton, Oglesby, and Marshall that total up roughly 2.5 megawatts. And last thing is that as far as battery, we met with multiple developers. We've developed the planning parameters of the study. We've put and just passed the money in the budget to go out and conduct the study, and we anticipate that being done by the end of the year. I'm going to turn it over to Rakesh, and then he'll update you on where we're heading with the plan.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Stacy. As Stacy explained, 2 guiding principles is the CEJA law, 2035 to 2038, where there's a requirement of 45% reduction, and then 2045, where there's a requirement of 100% reduction. That in addition to our net zero goal of by 2050. So what we did was, this is our view of where we see our load is, and try to match with the kind of resources that you really need in order to fit those needs. What you can see is our load is 1 gigawatt, which is fairly flat. And on the bottom line, below zero, is these are the retirements as we go through the timeline. As you can see, our peak, we are procuring resource much above peak load. It's because when you look at the thermal resources, these are the resources that run 85% capacity factor, and you're trying to replace those with wind, which is roughly 35, solar, which is 20 and 25%. You ought to procure more to meet the needs to serve your load. So that's why this is all nameplate. When you look at this, even though your peak load is assumed to stay flat, but the kind of resources that you're procuring is much higher. The next slide is, I know this is a busy slide. This is pretty much from PJM. PJM is the RTO that puts in the rules and regulations of the grid. What this slide is basically saying is, I know, and the previous slide showed you the energy that is needed. Not only do you have to procure energy, you have to, you're obligated to buy capacity. Capacity is historically called steel in the ground, but moving forward, what RTOs did is, what is the probability of your resource that is helping the grid during critical needs? So what these are, the way you look at it is like, okay, if I have a solar, what is PJM telling me in this example is, if I have a tracking solar in 2034, 35, their view is there's 4% chance. Now, as you have seen, we have a resource of portfolio, including solar and wind, but for hypothetical example, Naperville peak is roughly 350, and if we were to only serve the peak with solar through this chart, what it's saying is you need to procure 25 times your peak to meet those capacity obligations. There are 2 ways you can meet your capacity obligation. One is, sure, you can just buy it from the market, or you have your resources in your portfolio that you try to offset. Again, it's a requirement for PJM. They buy all, sell all. Every utility in the country has to go through it. So as we go through this, again, onshore wind right now is 35%. As you go through 34, 35 time frame, it's 15%. Next is we just went through solar. Storage, again, if you have a 100 megawatts solar storage facility of 4 hour, you're only going to get 56% of capacity accreditation. As we go through 34, 35, that number falls down to 38%. Nuclear, again, you can see that most of the thermal resources are flat. Part of the reason, I know nuclear is not dispatchable, but you have the ability to turn on and off to meet the grid needs during those conditions. Bee Hollow, we just went through a solar project here that Stacy went through that we are in the process of. It's already contracted, but if we were to, again, Bee Hollow is in MISO, but if we were to contract this facility in PJM, PJM would only give us a credit of 16.5 megawatts. So these are the type of challenges that you need to consider as you look into your resources. You need to satisfy not just energy, but capacity needs. Even on the energy side, what you have is RTOs have this administrative pricing. Whenever you need to have your resources when the grid is tight. If you don't, you will end up paying higher prices in your energy market. So those are the constraints, key constraints that you need to follow through during resource planning process. The next slide basically is, we just went through this. Basically, we took that ICAP curve and we assumed some of those decreasing trends in accreditation. As you can see, as we transition, battery becomes an increasing component as we try to do that. And it is critical. Again, this is our long-term view. Prior to any resource procurement, there will be multiple opportunities, including cost optimization, because there may be a scenario where we could just go and buy solar capacity, without all the additional, procuring energy and all the other things. So there are multiple ways we can continue to optimize this, but sitting here today, this is the view. I believe that's the view. This is the graph where basically we went through the ICAP, we went through the accreditation. This is the actual generation mix. As you look through the portfolio, I don't have battery in here. Battery only stores and discharges, so we did optimize battery already within the resource generation mix. If you look through the black line, there will still be times where your wind is not blowing and your solar resource is not producing when the time of need. So you will still have market purchases through the portfolio. Again, these could be either satisfied through market purchases or future carbon-free resources. With that, yeah.
We're just going back and forth a little bit here at the end. Real quick, I think one thing about that is again, this is what we're planning with technologies you're looking at now, but the one thing we can tell you is it will not look exactly like that in 2050 because nobody can guarantee those things. But the way that the contract is structured is that I think one of the speakers said, well, these things aren't in the contract. That's correct. What's in the contract is the board makes these decisions. They make these planning decisions. They look at the economics of each of these decisions prior to it, and that voice is through that, right? So there's multiple times and points so for example, we just passed the Bee Hollow contract. We brought all that information. We talked about the prices. The board makes the decision. So it's part of the overarching plan. And one of the other things that puts us in a really good position is that the long-term debt is paid off in 2035 for our thermal resources. And so at that point in time, you have more flexibility and more room to be able to continue adding renewable resources into your portfolio. And talking about that reliability, and the reliability really is the fact that we're a nonprofit, have an obligation, you have an obligation as a city to serve your load, and we share that obligation to serve the load. And so for us, bringing that predictability is that reliability. And power marketers are for profit, and they don't have that long-term service obligation. Those are shorter-term options, right? And those are choices you're going to have to consider and think about. But that, from IMEA's perspective and what our board has directed us to do, is to plan for the long term, to be there to provide the needed power supply, the transmission arrangements, and the services. And we're going to be doing that well beyond 2035. But once that debt's paid off, rates are projected to significantly decrease because that will no longer be a component of your rates in 2035 going forward. Resource transitioning has started, and we're working now. I just talked about Bee Hollow. We've spent a lot of time talking about that National Grid project. That is the beginning of planning to replace our resources. We had if you look earlier in Rakesh's slide deck, we had exited a coal-based contract, and so we've already exited out of some coal, and this Bee Hollow is beginning to fill that up, right? And then the other thing is that we have some major choices coming up with 2030, with Green River, and some of those others. So that's why we're planning the resource planning now. Longer-term deals, these 20-year contracts with renewables are much better priced than if you're looking at a 10-year contract. And you need really longer runways for planning purposes to strategically plan for the future. It's really the key to determining your electricity needs. And I'm going to turn it over to Rakesh to kind of talk about those longer-term deals and what we've been seeing.
Thank you, Stacy. I know I talked about Bee Hollow a second ago. This is one of the solar projects that we recently entered into a contract. Even though that happened in 2024, the life of the project, you understood, the beginnings of the project actually begin in 2018. This is when preliminary site design, the vendors look for preliminary site design, and then you need to have site control. Without those two things, you can't even enter into the queue. Once you have those things, you enter into the queue. This is MISO. They did 3 rounds of studies. We are lucky that this project was in the front half of the queue. Story is much more different, you understood, for projects that entered here in the last couple of years in the queue. There have been significant delays. Long story short, I mean, this project is supposed to come online in 2027, but you understood some of the key ingredients, including the investment to enter into those land contracts and those things, investment needs to happen multiple years before. Again, this is one of the reasons, you understood, when there's so much risk for the developers, they tend to want to not only extract this. If you look at a typical developer, when they put in 10 projects, let's say 3 or 4 of them are successful, they would like to recover all of that in that 3 or 4 successful projects. So when you're looking at such long-term investment, they do tend to want to have contracts much longer to recover those costs. Again, this is a hypothetical example. What we did was we took a 20-year solar PPA, these are hypothetical numbers, and how it applies to your portfolio. When you convert that into 10-year, obviously the price is significantly higher, and the developers would like to recover more within the first 10-year period. What you are looking is if you don't go with the traditional 20-year portfolios and you try to ask for a shorter portfolio with restrictions, it is going to be expensive. And in this one scenario, as you can see, that's $96 million, you understood, over the first 10 period in additional costs. We were lucky when we went through this. This is one of the contingency options that we tried to talk with all the developers because we don't have contracts beyond 2035. Luckily, during this time, we had enough members sign up to where we didn't need any of those contingencies. Again, these are some of the challenges as we look through the portfolio. When we try to add resources, these are long-term resources.
All right, we're almost to the end. I know we've been a while, so I appreciate your patience. So a couple of key things to close us out. And then, of course, fully open for all kinds of questions. One of the, in addition to the resources that IMEA is procuring, we are developing an option for members to procure additional renewables, and this can be local in your own community or connected to the Illinois grid. Right now, and we're calling this MDR, or member-directed resources. And right now, the way it's written is that it's limited to 10% of your peak demand. And that is a starting point. We call it kind of a can opener situation. It's a starting point. If it works for the portfolio and the board allows it, you can increase and have a higher percentage of MDR on a go-forward basis. So this resource, doesn't need to be in the city, but it does need to be in Illinois. The city would get full credit from the RTO that the generator is located in, with capacity and energy markets payments either in PJM or MISO. And that energy produced will be valued at the locational marginal price as determined by the regional market organization that generator is located within. So really, it sets it off in a way that you can have your own local resource, and it's set up in a way that it protects the other members and holds them harmless from costs and risks. Because overarchingly, we're a socialized agency, so these are sort of something we're allowing people to do kind of on their own, and if it works out well, then you guys share in the rewards, and if for some reason it doesn't work out great, then you take that risk as a city, but it's not shared with all the other members. And that's the concept, because everything else we do is in a socialized basis. But regardless of that, IMEA will manage that resource scheduling and market settlements on your behalf for your regional grid operators. We'll do all the scheduling and all of the back work that needs to be done. And in conclusion, Naperville's a valued partner with IMEA. We are a proven, low-cost, reliable supply partner. For 15 years, we have provided your power, and we have provided your residents with affordable, reliable power and services. We are committed to and on target to reach a net zero portfolio by 2050. As I mentioned, we offer a variety of value-added services tailor-made for your systems. So these are additional services to Naperville that you would need to, that would cost additional expenses if you were not with us. You would have to hire them out. But it is part of our relationship with the community and part of our overarching duties to have these resources, these services. And ones that you've used, I've talked about EE and all the market monitoring, et cetera, load forecasting, all of those types of things. And then one of the benefits that you have that really is unique is you have that direct voice in the decision making. We are nonprofit. Everything we do is for municipal utilities, and everything we do, every savings, all of that flows through to lower rates to your residents, and that makes us unique as well. And we believe that it's a good system, and we're happy that Naperville's a part of it. So appreciate your time, and we'll turn it over to questions if that's your desire.
There was a concern expressed in this very room back in January when there was a meeting held here about one risky aspect of Naperville renewing its contract with IMEA. And I think it was expressed as, you know, how do we know what the power from IMEA is going to cost 10 years from now? 10 years is a long time out. I put some thought into that, how to ask a question, or maybe ask a question where we could get an answer for that. And I noticed you had this little blue bar chart graph here that kind of shows the total cost that all your members have been paying, but I'd like to get a little bit more granular than that. It's my understanding, we'll use Prairie State for an example. Prairie State is a mine-to-mouth production facility, is that correct?
That's correct.
That means you dig the coal, you transfer the coal to the power plant, you burn the coal, you produce power, pollution control equipment, all that stuff.
Yep.
It seems to me that as a partial owner indirectly of that facility, you know pretty well what those costs are, right? You know what it costs to produce a megawatt hour of power from a plant you own. Is that correct?
Yes.
What is the cost to produce a megawatt hour at Prairie State?
For the kind of age of the plant that we are looking, hypothetically, the cost per megawatt hour is $30 per megawatt hour.
$30?
$30, 3 cents per kilowatt hour. Again, both Prairie State and Trimble are new plants, so they are well within that bandwidth.
Okay, just so at Prairie, let's just use Prairie State as an example. $30 a megawatt hour, right? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you wanted to extrapolate 10 years out into the future on a plant that you own and you know all the costs and everything, you don't have to worry about the market price of electricity or the market price of coal or anything like that, correct?
Yes, in that scenario, you're not exposed to the fuel price nor the market price, yes.
Okay, so I'm sure there's some sort of inflation index that applies to a coal mine, one that applies to a power plant, one that applies to steam generators. So if you note those, if you had a good approximation of some sort of inflation index, you could apply that inflation index for the next 10 years to generate a theoretical or estimated price of what the price of power would be 10 years from now, right? You could do that?
Sure.
Okay. Now I'll get back to Trimble County. I understand Trimble County is not a mine-to-mouth. They buy the coal, and then IMEA is a partial owner of the plant that burns the coal. So there's some market risk in owning Trimble County in terms of the price of coal. But using your best guess for current price of coal, what is a megawatt hour of production cost from Trimble County?
It's again well within the same bandwidth as Prairie State.
I'm sorry, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry. It's within the same bandwidth of the numbers that we were talking.
$30?
Yeah. I mean,
So-
typically for new projects that are the age, youngster supercritical, $30 is a rough proxy.
And there might be some capital expenses stuck in there now and then that might raise that, but
Yeah.
we're talking, let's say $30 to $35 a megawatt hour,
And
okay?
obviously, we do have system debt. That's not part of that. But as you're aware, in 2035,
Okay.
that will.
So you start with $30 at Prairie State, and now there's these bonds. I quite frankly, I don't really understand all the issues, but the owners, or IMEA is paying towards expiring bonds. In terms of dollars per megawatt hour for the next 10 years, what are those, what portion of the price do the bonds add up to? Dollars per megawatt hour.
What we have is system debt, so we don't typically put it by plant. But roughly, it's an additional 2 to 2.5 cents, I would say.
I'm sorry, what was that?
20 to 25 plus dollars per megawatt hour.
I'm still not understanding. In dollars per megawatt hour, what do the bonds add up to on an annual basis? If you don't know the number, that's okay.
So we can try and go get that number for you. Again, what Rakesh was trying to explain is the bonds are issued on a system debt basis, and they pay for Prairie State and Trimble County. The megawatt hours that IMEA runs through its books includes much more than just Prairie State and Trimble County. So our numbers aren't broken out the way you're asking the question.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you. Do you have a guesstimate of the range of what that bond payment is across the megawatt hours of those coal facilities? Even if it's just a guess. Is it $5, $10, $20?
Right now, it's actually higher than that. And again, Trimble County 2 was bought first, and it had a much lower cost of production. Some things happened in the labor market with Hurricane Katrina and some other things that happened back then when these plants were being built, so that Trimble County got built at a much better price than Prairie State. So if you were going to try and break them out, I did ask our CFO to try and break them out for us. So Rakesh gave you a number of 30. You said 30 to 35. I think that's fair for the costs. The debt right now, based on, again, just the preliminary numbers, we don't look at them this way, but if we had to look at it, Prairie State would be an extra $35 and Trimble would be an extra 15 or less.
On top of the 30?
Yes.
Okay.
But again, as Rakesh was saying, our system debt is going to be paid off on February 1st, 2035.
Okay, because you guys said that Naperville's price is going to drop 25% in 2035. It seems like that would be a number that would be at the tip of your fingers. How far is the price going to drop in 2035 to Naperville?
Yeah.
And there was a slide that showed an illustration of that based on some facts that we were looking at when we were doing Bee Hollow. It's on the slideshow.
All right.
The drop is because the debt goes away, and if you look at the overall budget for IMEA, and you take the amount of the bonds that we're paying every year and subtract that from the budget starting in 2035, it takes 25% out of the budget. That's where that number comes from.
Okay. So let's move on to 2035. In your little serpentine chart where you showed the things that are happening over the years, it was indicated in that chart that this 45% reduction of CO2 required by CEJA, you showed a range in there of 2035 to 2038. I personally believe that carbon capture will never be built. I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me personally. So I assume that you're going to achieve that reduction through running the plant at lower rates. Is that fair?
Yeah. So
would those lower rates start at the end of 2038, or would you lower them over a 3-year period? What's the sequence of events on that?
I think there are a couple of scenarios here. First of all, we do share the same sentiment on carbon capture. To be clear, on the carbon capture, the only mechanism that we are looking at is private investment come in, take advantage of the tax credits, invest, and operate the facility. So far, what the owners or IMEA have been talking about is private investment. So again, I update that pretty much each month. There's no commitment either from the owners or Prairie State itself.
So when will you lower the rate at Prairie State? What year?
So that's where I was going next, sorry. In 2035, assuming that there's significant accommodation from the RTOs, especially with some of the requirements involving startup, ability to recover those costs, and still treat capacity, extract capacity value out of one of the unit. That's one option. The other option is to retire that one unit. So cycling it. So 2035 to 2038, we will try hard to do that.
Okay. So let's say you've met your objective at the end of 2038. You're now down to 45% CO2 reductions, which essentially means you're probably going to be running at half rate, right?
Yeah.
Now, getting back to my earlier question about, you know what your cost of production was? You said it was $35, I think, or $30 at Prairie State, because you own it, you know everything. There's no market risk or anything like that.
Yeah.
So to me, the numerator is going to stay pretty much the same in terms of your cost of that plant. You're not going to probably lay anybody off. You might dig a little less coal, but essentially your costs are going to be about the same. But the denominator is going to go down to 1/2, right? You're going to produce about half as much electricity. Is that correct?
That's correct. However, you understood, when you're running the unit less, you understood you're employing less people. You understood the quantity of the coal goes down.
So there'll be some
less
reduction in
yes,
costs.
there will be some reduction.
But not a whole lot. So if you have a similar amount of costs, but you cut your production in half, essentially that doubles the price, doesn't it?
Yes, but
By math, just by math?
yeah.
So again, I'm not trying to nail you to the very penny
No,
here,
yeah,
but it sounds
okay. Yeah,
like
in general speaking,
sounds
yes.
like at the end of 2038, the price of power from Prairie State, and I'm excluding inflation here right now. There'll be some inflation for all these stuff. Will roughly be $60. Does that make sense?
I think it will be much less than that, because obviously there are some of the optimizations you are going to do, and you assume that by then RTOs will have structures in place where you could recover some of those costs.
Okay, so something a little bit south of $65 or $60.
I would say.
That's good.
Yeah,
I'm just trying to get some
Sure.
generalities about this facility in my mind and trying to plot out this timeline.
Yeah.
So I want to switch over to Bee Hollow now, which is the new solar plant that you guys just contracted for, right? It starts production in 26, 27, is that correct?
Yeah.
It's a 20-year deal.
Yep.
What is the price of the solar that you're paying from Bee Hollow?
So I'll try to answer the question. The exact price is subjected to confidentiality in the agreement, but in general, within the region, if you look at IPA's results lately, some of the prices of solar are about $75. $75 per megawatt
Okay,
hour.
so
ours is
facilities like Bee Hollow are about $75 right now.
If
correct?
you were to go to the market right now, it's about 75. Yes.
Okay. And that's a 20-year
That's a 20-year commitment.
Okay. Does that, for solar farms in the general area that are like Bee Hollow, those contracts, are they fixed for, is the price fixed for 20 years, or does it escalate over time? Is there an escalation clause in similar facilities?
Let's assume fixed.
I'm sorry?
It is fixed.
It's fixed.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
just to
$70
yeah.
for the next 20 years. No
Yes.
escalation or anything like
Yeah.
that.
Again, this is a MISO resource. If you look at PJM resource, that number is much higher, much more into 80.
Well, I'm talking about Bee Hollow.
Yeah, B Hall is 75.
All right. Do you know, just factually speaking, how many acres does Bee Hollow cover? I'm just curious.
Over 1,800 acres.
How much?
1,800 acres.
1,800. Okay. I just happen to know that Spring Prairie, you guys aren't familiar with it, but everybody knows where Spring Prairie. Spring Prairie is 1,800 acres. So what you're talking about at Bee Hollow is a solar farm that is on the same scale of Naperville's Spring Prairie, 1,800 acres, just for all your information. So what I'm trying to do now is take the price of Prairie State out to 20, well, Prairie State today is about $30, I think you said. I'm not 100% sure how much the bonds are on top of that. I think you said it might be $30. Is that kind of a close number?
Yeah. For hypothetical discussion, yes.
Okay, so that's $60 to $65. So that's the price that Napervillians are paying today to get power from Prairie State, and you just did a solar deal that roughly is, like you said, $70, right?
75 range.
So I often hear that solar prices are dropping. They're dropping like a rock. But those numbers don't seem to indicate that's true. I presume that you had your best team out there going out and trying to buy the best solar power that you possibly could. You worked the deal, I think you said, for 9 years, right?
Yep.
And that's the deal you came up with. I doubt that anybody could have come up with a cheaper solar farm than that, right? You guys have professionals that do that for a living. So I guess by just the 2 data points that we have right now, Prairie State is producing power for Naperville at roughly $60, and Bee Hollow's producing, or will be producing, at $70, right?
Yeah, 70 plus, whatever, yeah.
Or 75, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
75. Is the expectation for solar fields, solar farms, the price of that, is the expectation that those are going to go down, or is it going to go up? Just on your professional opinion, you know, the folks that did this know the markets of solar generation. Is the expectation those prices are going up or down?
Unfortunately, we are competing with the data centers, and every single utility at the same time. So your demand is significantly high, so it is going up, unfortunately.
Do you think they're going up?
Yes.
Okay. One thing I'm a little perplexed about, I thought I understood the capacity market, but I guess I don't. But Bee Hollow is 150 megawatts,
Yes.
correct? Of nameplate capacity?
Yes, nameplate.
But on your table here, I think you said that in the capacity market, it's only worth 6 megawatts, right?
If it was in PJM in 2035, yes, it is.
It's in MISO, right?
It's in MISO. Right now, again, this is a little more complex. MISO is going through these rule changes. It will be pretty close later on.
I think I'm just quoting the footnote on
Sure.
your own slide. Yeah, 6 megawatts. That's your slide, right?
Yeah.
6 megawatts.
That was assuming it was in PJM.
For illustrative purposes, if it was in PJM, and those are the numbers in 2030.
Oh, I see. Okay, I got you. Well, it's accredited for 6 megawatts in MISO. Is that correct?
In 2035, if you run through MISO numbers, you'd probably get the same accreditation.
Okay. Why does a solar facility that has 150 megawatt nameplate only derive 6 megawatts of capacity? Why is that?
Because PJM and MISO, what they're trying to do is they're trying to model the risk back to the asset owners. Meaning, if you bring an asset, let's say you have a perfect asset that can run anytime, you understood that the grid wants, you'll probably get 100%. As you can see, you understood none of the assets are perfect, but because of inability for them to, basically what those numbers mean is they've done their modeling, and they have determined that is the percentage usability of that asset.
Okay, but it also has something to do with the fact that the sun only shines half the day, right?
Oh yeah, that's
And a solar panel
that's the
doesn't put
fundamental.
out 100 megawatts when the sun is shining on it directly, right?
Yep.
Solar panels have a low efficiency of generating power relative to their nameplate, right?
Yes, and
That's
non-dispatchability.
one of the reasons?
Yeah, non-dispatchability is the other reason.
Can I piggyback that question?
Yeah, sure.
So I think PJM was under some scrutiny at some point because those numbers were so low. So what happens if they do deliver higher than, for example, 6 megawatts?
In hypothetical scenario, sure, they update these numbers each year, but there is significant transparency where it's going to be pretty much within that band. You understood? Yeah, 6 can go a little bit higher or a little bit lower based on the updated model that they have. But go ahead.
So what you've explained to me in the past, Rakesh, is that what both PJM and MISO are moving towards is looking at the critical hours when the grid needs it to pay for capacity, and the critical hours will change. So as you add more solar to the mix, it will move when the critical hours are because the solar's there, and that's what's driving the reduction. The anticipation that wind and solar are the only resources that are going to get built over the next decade, and that those will cause the hours of critical need to shift.
I think the point that I'm trying to get at, and I guess I should just say it directly, is that solar fields do not contribute much to the capacity ability of a grid, right?
PJM shares the same concern. What they recently did was, and FERC approved it, they want to stop all the resources in the queue, open a new queue just to get the resources that they can extract higher capacity. That aren't solar.
All right.
Jim,
I guess
The answer is yes. From a capacity perspective, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to overbuy. If you're shutting down a fossil resource and you're replacing with solar, you're not going to be able to replace a 100 megawatt gas plant or coal plant with 100 megawatts of solar. Instead, you're going to have to buy multiples of the solar to meet the same capacity requirements. And that's why we've built in storage is going to become very important. That's why we're beginning to study and build that in. So this is truly a time of transition, and there are challenges that come with it. You've kind of highlighted some of those challenges that we're all going to be working towards moving forward.
Okay.
Jim, can I add on just a quick question? From my understanding, it's just basic physics, right? The solar is just simply not as dense. Is that correct? In terms of energy production?
No, not just that. So what happens is, what RTOs are looking at is your critical hours. They do know when the solar production is happening. You're basically shifting your risk hours further and further into the evening where the production is not higher. So that's basically it. And what they are saying is, as we try to move that risk further into those hours where solar production is not happening, that's why they're getting less accreditation.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, we'll get off of that uncomfortable topic and move on to something else. According to recent reports that I've seen, I think, and they're true, capacity prices in PJM, which is where we exist, have gone from $29 per megawatt day to $270 per megawatt day. It's like an 800% increase.
Yeah.
And that starts this June.
Yep,
correct?
June 1.
Also, all right, I'm going to skip by a couple things that I was going to ask, but all of Naperville's surrounding communities, like Aurora, Warrenville, Lyle, Downers Grove, Bolingbrook, generally get their power through ComEd. I believe that's true.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but because Naperville is a member of a joint action agency like IMEA, Naperville is immune to this capacity price increase, correct?
That's correct.
Do you have a back-of-the-envelope calculation of what Naperville ratepayers will save because we are part of IMEA as compared to our neighbors? Do you know what that number is per
Sure.
month or per year or whatever?
Yeah. So ComEd itself is roughly 22, 23 gigawatts. When you
I'm just looking for dollars.
I'm
Just to give me the
so
dollars.
it's $2 billion for entire ComEd ratepayers. For Naperville, that number is $32 million.
That's for the year.
For the year.
So from June of this year until June of next year, Naperville ratepayers are going to save $32 million because we're not subject to the capacity increases that all of our neighbors are
Yep.
exposed to, right?
Yes.
I would presume that you consider that an advantage for Naperville to belong to IMEA?
Oh, absolutely. It's
That's
part of,
$32 million that everybody in their own little way is going to pay less.
sure, yeah.
Okay.
Just for a brief bit of clarity, there is for the way they structure it, there will be an offset to some degree to ComEd customers, but they're still going to have a substantial
The
increase.
CFRA.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, right.
I just wanted to make sure.
Okay,
we weren't-
I'm just trying to make the point that
Yeah,
one of
sure.
the advantages of belonging to your group is, here, we're going to see it in June, $32 million. That's a big deal for some large office owners. It's probably $20 a month for every household.
Yeah.
This is an advantage of staying with IMEA. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to.
So it's straight math as well, 350, which is your peak load, times, add little bit reserves to that, times 365, times 250.
Yeah,
So
okay.
when you do that.
All right, I am almost done, and I'll turn it over to the rest of these guys. But every report that I read from PJM, from MISO, and from NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, which is kind of the overlord of PJM and MISO, they're all casting grave concerns that reserve margins are expected to approach critically low levels in both MISO and PJM within just the next few years. If this, or when this happens, there will be a substantially greater risk of regional blackouts during peak demand periods, usually experienced in the dead of winter or heat of summer. And I'm just going to read from NERC's 2024 long-term reliability assessment, which has placed MISO, which is middle of Illinois, southern Illinois, in the high-risk area. It's labeled high risk. There's no other grid that's in the high-risk area. And what they say, this is their words, high-risk areas are likely to experience a shortfall of electricity supplies at the peak of an average summer or winter season. Unusual heat waves or deep freeze events pose an even greater threat to reliability. So this is NERC. These guys know what they're talking about. So given that, I'd ask you to explain what reserve margins are, but I think everybody else wants to ask questions. To me, they're just like the safety margin that grids build into. They ask, you know, they try to calculate what the demand is, and it's X. They try to have X plus a little bit in reserve so that they can be sure to cover any uncertainties that happen, right? So that's reserve margins.
Yep.
So in my world, if there's a shortage of electricity coming up over the next 5 to 10 years, or whatever window you want to look at, as stated by NERC, as shortages of something occur, to me, the price goes up.
Yeah.
So in my world that I live in, shortages of electricity means prices in the future, in this 5 to 10 year window that these guys look at, prices are only going to go up for market electricity.
Yeah.
So in that view, getting back to the way I started this discussion, that Prairie State and Trimble County, their costs are not market related whatsoever. You dig the coal out of the ground, you burn it, you produce electricity, that's a price, which is $30. And NERC is telling us that power is going to be in short supply this year. Their warning is for this year. You guys that live in MISO could be experiencing blackouts.
Yeah.
So we've seen a little bit of a discrepancy, or a little bit differential between the price of power generated by Prairie State versus Honeybee being expensive. So that's a data point that says solar is not less expensive than Prairie State. But if you try to do a qualitative analysis of what these what NERC and these RTOs are telling us, power prices are only going up. So in that view, the Prairie State campus in Trimble County look like they're going to offer better value in the future, unless somebody comes up with some new information on this.
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, we would agree with that. That has been the philosophy of the agency all along, and the cities have asked us to do that's why we try to own resources to hedge against these exact scenarios, right? And that ownership is the philosophy, and especially as PJM prices in particular, capacity prices are definitely going up. That is going to become a valuable. Our portfolio is structured in a way that we are going to be well positioned for that future.
And I just want to say that layered on top of all this, in the PJM area that we live in, CEJA, the law, Illinois Clean and Equitable Jobs Act of 2021, requires natural gas peaker plants to start shutting down in this area, the surrounding Chicago area, starting in 2030. And in 2030, if everybody follows the law of CEJA, 12 of 18 megawatts of natural gas-fired power plants, peaker plants they're called, because they fire them up when there's a shortage of electricity and they shut them down when we're back to normal levels. This is the balancing wheel between supply and demand right now. 12 of 18 gigawatts of those peaker plants are supposed to shut down in the year 2030, which is 5 years from now.
Yes. Not only that, if you look at the last year auction results, there's roughly 30 gigawatts of coal that was in supply. These are plants that are pretty much reaching the end of their useful life. And PJM also raised that as an issue. When you combine this with those 20 or 25 gigawatts that are at risk, in addition, at the same time, you're having increased load with electrification and data center. So these are real risks that RTO PJM has laid out.
And some of the concern that NERC expressed is due to these peaker plants shutting down. They're not mutually exclusive events, but this is in our backyard. This is in our backyard. There's about a dozen of them they have to shut down, these flywheels that exist between supply and demand. And we saw the 6 megawatts of capacity that comes out of a solar field. I don't see solar solving that problem in the next 5 years. So all of these things, just to me, as a person who just reads these reports, looks dire. And I see electricity prices only increasing. I assume you share that opinion. So with that, I'll give up the floor to everybody else.
Well, I want to go in a consistent fashion instead of back and forth and make sure we don't, I should turn my mic on. I'd like to continue in that direction so that I could continue. So go ahead, Michelle.
Thank you. And first, I'm going to apologize because my background is not in power purchasing. Sure. But so I'm looking back at the slide that kind of has the pinwheel that shows the breakdown of IMEA resources, and I just want to better understand. So, of what percentage does IMEA own of its powers? Like of the power sources, what percentage does IMEA own?
So when we deal with the RTOs, sometimes the word ownership means control, and we're allowed to bid it into their markets if we have control. Most of the resources that you see on the pinwheel are power purchase agreements, not ownership. Okay. The actual ownership interest, what IMEA owns in its own name, if we were talking about land, I'd say fee simple as a lawyer. What we own is we own 12.12% of everything at Trimble County, 1 and 2. Now that plant has some other natural gas plants on it that we don't own a piece of. So just units 1, unit 2, and the common infrastructure, we own 12.12%. At Prairie State, we own 15.17%. And there are no other resources there that we don't own a part of. So everything at Prairie State, we own 15.17%. That means we're entitled to the production, the output from 15.17. We may dispatch differently because we put in different offer curves than the other co-owners, but roughly that means We own 246 megawatts in Prairie State. We own roughly 150 megawatts in Trimble County, because Trimble County 1 is roughly 61 and Trimble County 2 is roughly 62, and there's seasonal differences and they test every year, so round numbers, okay? So 246 and 150, and then I believe, is it 6 megawatts in Flora? We own some behind the meter in the city of Flora, which we put in as an incentive to their manufacturers, so that they could have just-in-time production and know that they had backup there at that location.
Thank you.
That's what we own. The other things on here are power purchase agreements. In the instance of the member generation, those are capacity purchase agreements that we have with those other members who have the generators behind the meter.
Also looking at the PJM credit chart, I think, what was that slide? But anyway, slide 12. So it has nuclear listed as the highest, and I was just kind of curious why that's not part of the energy mix, because that is considered net zero with PJA, and I know at least in the past, I don't know what NES's current stance is on that. They, I think that was something that they were supportive of too as an option. I think looking at renewable net zero, it's very heavy on solar and that kind of stuff, and I was just curious about nuclear.
So
We may split this. Go ahead.
yeah, I'll try and
Go ahead.
you join in. So as you look through resources, I mean, obviously the big ones that you answered, Constellation owns in the region. Then the other option is you answered these modular nuclear reactors. You answered as a portfolio. Right now, I mean, there's the one that was tried was in Idaho. I think similar to our agency, you answered Utah Municipal Agency participated in that. But they have determined you understood the cost. It was not cost effective. So while we are actively looking at those, I don't think you understood the time horizon. I think it will take an additional 10, 15 years. We definitely don't want to be the first you understood exploring that. But once you have your Model 1, Model 2, where it's commercially reasonable, then we can explore those things.
So I said we'd split this, if you'll allow me. The nuclear that's listed on this chart for PJM isn't modular nuclear, the small module, because they don't exist yet. The nuclear that's on this chart is the units that are owned by Constellation. It used to be Exelon, they split. There's one of those in MISO. It's not far from my home. It's in Clinton, Illinois. Right now, IMEA has a contract with Constellation. We're in the last year of a 5-year capacity deal. We also have another energy hedge for one of the seasons, whether it was winter or summer. We've done 5 or 6 of them. I don't remember which one's which. But we have gone to Constellation. We have contracted with them for capacity, and we've contracted with them for energy. We know it's coming out of that nuclear plant, but we don't get to claim that it's coming out of that nuclear plant, because contractually, they're selling the nuclear credits back to the state for the subsidy payments under the FEJA law. For that particular plant, it's the FEJA law. If we were talking about the ones up in the ComEd region, it might be the CEJA law subsidies. So that's why it's not shown in our portfolio. The only place right now that you could get that is through a contract with Constellation, and they won't sell it to us.
Okay.
Because they're getting the credits, because they're selling their nuclear credits to the state for the subsidy payments.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. My last question, you had a slide that touched a little bit on the current IMEA contract. Do you mind, and maybe this is also for city staff a little bit, but just kind of giving us like the key highlights of some of the key terms of the contracts? I'm thinking specifically like upcoming dates, because I know that that's raised a lot of questions and stuff lately.
I guess that's me again. And I'm not sure I heard everything you said. So did you want me to run through the contract structure?
No. Just some of the key, like the contract, like the dates, deadlines for making a decision, when the contract expires, by when we would need to make a decision, just for
I think I
everybody's
understand your
benefit.
question. Let me do my best to answer it. By my way of thinking, there's been some conversations that I think are misinterpreting the contract. I said this in response to a question from a trustee in Winnetka a couple weeks ago. There's not an option for Naperville to renew in 2030. You don't have hey, we don't have to sign up until 2030. It doesn't say that. It never did, and it never will, and it was not intended to be that way. And I don't know if you can tell from looking at me, I'm a little older now. I used to be the youngest guy in the room at IMEA. I've been there a long time. I wasn't there when they did the very first contract, but I came in about 5 minutes later, and I've been administering it for the last 33 years. So when I tell you, I know what the words in that language say, and I know what it means because I wrote them. What it means is there's a statute that IMEA was formed under. Normally, if you guys were going to go out for a service contract, or if you're going to hire a city manager, you can't do contracts longer than the term of your mayor. Okay, that's just normal municipal law in the state of Illinois. In order to avoid that, because you can't go make long-term investments on 4-year contracts, the statute says you can do 50-year contracts. The first contracts that IMEA did when it was issuing bonds and when it needed to have long-term contracts were in 1990. So 50 years is 2040. So when we've extended those contracts in the middle, not for Naperville because you actually started receiving service in 2011, but for those who have been receiving service from IMEA since 1990, they will be reaching their 50-year ceiling if we get to 2040. We knew we were going to have a 5-year notice provision, so we put in the end of this contract. We wanted some cushion so that we didn't run into problems with someone saying we exceeded our statutory authority for the 50 years. So we put in an end date of September 30th, 2035 on 5 years notice. If you don't give 5 years notice there and we don't give 5 years notice back, it could roll over another year. And then it could roll over another year, but it can't roll, the existing contracts can't roll farther than 2040. That's why those dates are there. It's not a 5-year re-up guarantee option provision. We always knew, and I can give you an example. We always knew that about 10 years before the end of the contract is when you were going to need to be making the next resource decision. So we always knew that about this time is when we would be going to all of the members and talking to them about extending their contracts. And here's my example. If you had been one of the members that signed up in 1990, your contract would have given you an option of 15 years, 20 years, or 30 years. Most of the members took the 30-year option. So your contracts would have ended in 2025, okay? In 2003 and 4 is when the next resource decision needed to be made for IMEA back then. We were looking at whether to exercise our option to buy into to Trimble County 2 in 2003 and 2004. For contracts that weren't supposed to end until 2025. So what's that? That's more than 10 years, right? And then what we did back then was we did 10-year extensions to get from 2025 to 2035. So again, you're asking about the timing. I think this is the question you're asking, whether you have the right to wait until 2030. And the answer is you do not have a contract option. Of course, you're a member of IMEA, and we're going to do everything we can to serve you and to give you every option that we can to come along later. But if you guys make a decision later to come along and it costs more to serve you, we have an example of that as well. When Naperville came along in 2006 and started talking to us about signing up, we needed to go out and buy Prairie State to serve you. We didn't have enough resources in our mix to serve you. It's in the addendum to the contract that we went out and bought into Prairie State to serve Naperville. And there's an addendum to your power sales contract which charged you a premium on top of what all the other members were paying because you joined late. At the time that you joined, the costs were higher, and therefore we needed to charge that premium in order to let you guys come in and buy from us. So I don't know if that answers all your questions.
So in general, we have,
So,
for example, 5 more years to make a decision, but it could very well cost us.
well,
Yeah.
you might have 5, you might have 10,
Yeah.
it depends. But right now, the board has given an open period that we're allowed to offer these contracts to everybody through April 30th. The board may extend that. The board may consider it on a case-by-case basis for those who don't sign up. But if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have been able to get the 25 to sign up that we did, and we wouldn't have been able to sign the Be Hollow contract, and we would still be out there looking for a solar resource to try and satisfy the people that want that and to get our needs.
Thank you.
Is that, Ann?
Yeah, it does, and maybe I'll just kind of end it with a comment. I mean, I understand the load planning and the power, some of the power purchasing, all that. I understand that that takes time, and I think, you know, we're trying to also, you know, meeting with CES next week and stuff. I think just me as a board member, as a citizen, and as a ratepayer, I just feel like we need to go through the financial prudency of putting this out for bid and out for, just to, you know, things have gone, IMEA has done a really good job. I think in the future could very well continue to do a really good job, but I think it would be most prudent for us to go through the due diligence of putting it out for bid.
Lou, can I?
Is that it,
That's
Michelle?
it. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Lou, can I jump on?
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry.
That's a better explanation than I had given at previous council meetings, but, and maybe this isn't the best analogy, but from my perspective, if I were renting an apartment for 3 years and I said, hey, my rental expires April 30th, and I decide to wait to figure things out until April 29th, as a council member, I look at it as, you know, financial prudency and looking at after the taxpayers. Similarly, if I were to do that, I don't think that'd be the most fiscally responsible for myself, would be to wait until the very last day before a contract were to end, because at the very least, I need to plan for moving and worrying about my things. Similarly here, as it's been explained to me, we need to look at capacity and what resources, and thanks for that explanation on, because to your point, and I think there's been some confusion or misunderstanding, I don't know the right word for it, about the 2030 deadline and 5 years. And I guess part of that too had been my concern, again, as a council person, that we may be subjected to higher rates at the very least. So just from pointing that out from my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. That was good. Phil?
So kind of picking back up on the topic that was just discussed, if the city of Naperville at some point decides not to move forward and stay with IMEA, as I don't know if this is the right word to describe it, owner or investor in IMEA, setting aside the city of Naperville's requirements to be able to provide capacity and supply for its residents, setting that to the side, what other financial implications could that have on the city if they were no longer getting their supply from IMEA?
Looks like that one's me again. IMEA was created under the statute that Stacy mentioned earlier, and the implementing document, I don't know how many of you, I think of things as a lawyer, so I apologize, and when I was speaking to the Winnetka Village Board, a lot of them were lawyers. I don't know if any of you were lawyers. I listened when you told me, and it's all slipped my mind, so. If you've ever been a businessman that incorporated a new corporation or that did a limited liability company, you understand that articles of incorporation or your LLC organization documents, you understand what those are. IMEA has one of those as well. It's called an agency agreement. It's the agreement that all of the municipalities signed when they wanted to form the IMEA, and Naperville was one of those that was there when we originally were formed in 1984. That document has provisions for assessments, okay? And there's a procedure, a very strict procedure in there about assessments. So at the time, in 1984, when they were first formed, because before we were buying and selling any power, we're just trying to get stuff together. There were some assessments. And the IMEA board or the staff working for them had to create a budget, had to present it to the members in advance, so many days. And members who decided they didn't want to pay the assessments had an opportunity to exit from their ownership or membership in IMEA. That document still exists today. Nobody's used it since 1990 because we issued the bonds and we started providing a full requirements shop 24/7, 365, and everything that happens at IMEA gets paid for out of the operating budget or out of a capital budget, and we haven't used those assessment provisions in the agency agreement since before 1990. I think that answers your question. Is that what you were asking?
I think so, yeah.
So if you didn't sign back up and you wanted to stay with IMEA, and all IMEA is doing is power supply, I don't see how anybody charges you anything, and if we tried, there are strict procedures for those assessment budgets that would have to come to you. If you stayed a member of IMEA for some of the other benefits we provide, and we were able to go divvy out between our power supply budget and our membership budget, you might be willing to stay in and pay those assessments, but you're always going to have that opportunity under that agency agreement to see the budget for the the stuff you'd have to contribute to in advance, and you'll have a timeline for getting out if you decide you don't want to be in there anymore. So,
Okay.
again, that's
thank you.
existing documents. Those documents existed while I was still in high school, and I've been here a long time.
Got it, thank you. You presented a slide earlier on the tailor-made services. There's an array of different things that you could do. Most of those seem like things I'd never heard of, or maybe just aren't apparent in the city of Naperville. Take demand response, for example. That slide kind of infers that is a offering that IMEA provides, but I'm not aware that it is active in demand response, or active in Naperville. Could you share more about that as an example?
Sure. Each year, our board decides the compensation, and we go actively with our members and try to market those, just to look for opportunities where you can, rather than procuring capacity, you can try to offset with some of those, and quite frankly, our members take advantage of that. Naperville had some customers that did participate in the program. Brian, do you want to?
That's correct. So I think perhaps where you're going with this question is we do not offer a demand response program to residential customers. We do offer it to our largest customers. We've had as many as 4 customers be enrolled over the time. Currently, we have 1. Quite honestly, what it comes down to is for manufacturing and large businesses, it's very difficult for them to peak shave or to turn down their operations for a small amount of time, because if you're a plastics plant or something like that, shutdown is not really an option. So yes, we do offer it. Our water folks do try to curtail energy use, and they're one of the participants in the IMEA program right now. We are, as a local municipal electric utility, did receive a grant, and we had talked about that at a previous PUAB member, for a distributed energy management system, where we're looking to be able to do some more demand response programs, and we're working with IMEA on peak shave and what those cost shares look like.
And that program was actually created at the request of Naperville. They had a customer asking several years ago, but they didn't want to take the risk of. So for those of you who don't know, demand response is essentially you get paid. These large companies will get paid to reduce their power during grid stress times, peak times, right? And if you were to, and correct me if I say things a little too layman and incorrectly, Rakesh, but if you put it through the PJM market, if you don't perform, if you don't lower your power when they call on you, there's significant penalties. And so a lot of companies really weren't interested in that risk. And so we developed a program, an IMEA-specific program, where we looked at our peaks, and we set it up in a way that we set the price, and we would pay them if they reduced. And if they didn't, then they don't have to pay a penalty. They just don't get paid, right? So we try to set up a more user-friendly program to get more companies interested. We've had off and on success through the years, but we do offer that as a marketing tool. We have other customers in other communities that utilize it as well.
Okay, thank you. Two more questions. With regards to the I think you called it your decarbonization map, strategy, transformation, sorry, the decarbonization transformation. Are there any plans to accelerate decarbonization of the current capacity or supply mix earlier in the timeline?
Well, right now, that's the plan based on what we're thinking it will make sense from an economic standpoint and taking into account the payment of our bonds and the requirements of state law. At the same time, as I mentioned, if anybody's going to tell you exactly what they're going to do in 2050, they can't tell you that right now. We're a nonprofit entity. The other owners of Prairie State are nonprofit entities. If there is an innovative new technology that can get us the price we need at an economic rate, and it makes sense from an economic perspective, we would be looking to accelerate those dates, right? It's all, and the way, and we didn't include, this isn't the full resource plan, that's on our website, I think it's on your website too, but there's short-term, interim, and long-term planning, and we'll be, the board drives all those decisions. And they look at the economics in the moment and what's in front of us, and those decisions are made. So that's why it's not in the contract, because from our perspective, if you put very specific things like that in the contract, and then it doesn't make sense at the time, you'd have to go back to 32 cities and go through all. It just couldn't functionally work, if that makes sense.
Okay. And my last question is kind of going back to the energy mix curve. So it looks like it's not until around 2035 that you guys are forecasting that you would have, let's look at it, maybe 50% of the mix would be considered renewable. Does that seem about right? I'm on the, well, it's labeled slide 14, I think, energy mix in megawatt hours for net zero strategy.
I mean, we don't have the percentages there, but roughly, when you start getting to 2035, is that the date you listed? I apologize.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when you have the ability to begin that flexibility that your debt's gone, you've got some more flexibility, and you're reducing half of your Prairie State, probably cycling it, or something of that nature.
Got it, okay. So here's my sort of, I think it's the elephant in the room question. The city of Naperville has traditionally been ranked one of the best cities in the U.S. to live in and raise your kids. Pick your generation, whether you're a boomer or you're a Gen Z, there's an ongoing movement and transition to want to be sustainable and do the right things for the environment. I have teenagers, who live and hear these conversations all the time. We hear it in the workplace and other places. And then, I try to track things that we read online on social media from concerned, residents in Naperville and what's been represented by Nest. And I think people just really have a hard time grasping this idea that you're going to live in one of the best cities in the U.S., yet be one of the highest contributors to, carbon and dirty emissions and be attached to a fossil power plant. I think people just are really struggling to try to understand why that is a good decision. Now, maybe they don't understand what the alternatives are or haven't thought about it through the cost lens, but you're sitting in this room today, but pretend this is the kids in the high schools around us who are asking these same questions, or the other concerned citizens. Many are here in this room. How do you respond to them and help them think through that we're going to live in an environment, portray that we're a really good community, but yet we're going to continue to consume dirty power, even if it's cheap, but still somehow promote this image that this is a great community.
Well, and Troy, you feel free to add on, but I think that we, again, as a nonprofit entity, we are trying to transition in an economic and affordable manner, and it truly is a time of transition. And there are, if we could make this happen today, we would do it today, right? And that's why no one in the nation is fully 100% carbon free at this time. If they say they are, they're doing it through the purchase of renewable energy credits. We offer a similar program that you could buy enough RECs from us. We could work that out now to make you 100% renewable through a renewable energy credit program, right? So from our perspective, I believe that we believe in the transition. That's the reason we have the sustainability plan. And there will be fossil fuel, not necessarily just coal, but fossil fuel on the grid for some time to come still yet. And I think the entire nation is really struggling to work through this the exact same time. And so we're trying to bring that expertise and help you work your way through that process. But again, that's kind of the benefit of public power. You get your voice heard every step along the way. I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to that. But I think that's the goal. The board has voted on the goal, and that's the plan, is to get there. It's just that there really isn't a technology yet that can fully make people completely carbon free. And so that will be a part. Honestly, if you're on the market, you're going to be receiving, you're going to also have fossil fuel in your power mix as well.
I guess if I can, please add something else. And Rakesh, you know this better than I do. I was literally just reviewing on the Prairie State website the slides that they showed us when we did the plant tour a couple months ago. And there are some very telling numbers on there about what you're talking about. When you say it's a dirty coal plant, this isn't something that was built in the 60s and is still running, that never had scrubbers and never had anything. I mean, every available technology to clean the emissions is being done. The SO2 and the NOx have been reduced as far as humanly possible right now. The particulate matter has been reduced. So it's easy to say dirty coal, but what you're talking about is carbon dioxide. The other things, Prairie State takes care of better than any other plant in the country.
Yeah, and I mean, I recognize the effort that IMEA has made in the journey to transition. Some might argue that it's taken longer. I certainly respect what you said. I used to work in a power plant. I've walked in scrubbers, had to put the mask on. I've dealt with the EPA and all the emissions, requirements that go along with that. So I totally get it. I've also worked with Amazon and Microsoft, which is the only company in the world that has a negative carbon goal. And I also understand the challenge of that. They're buying pretty much all the green capacity that's being built, right? They're the ones out there who have unlimited funds to go and develop the renewables, which makes it really hard to compete against that at a price level, or whether you're trying to get the interconnections or all that, right? So, but I think with regards to dirty power is that's the word, or that's the perception in the community when they hear these things. And I think that's why I'm kind of speaking for behalf of people that I've talked to or what I've heard from, is that that's their perception, and almost feels like IMEA is in the situation where maybe they didn't do enough soon enough. But I also understand that it takes many, many, many years to make that transition, and thus maybe could have or should have made that transition sooner. So I don't say that as a critique. I think it's just that this is the conundrum that not just the city of Naperville finds itself in, but a lot of companies who have set net zero goals, who similarly are trying to move away from or move towards cleaner fuels, but can't find the resources, or it's not economical, or can't do it at the pace that they want. But our community, I think, is wanting to move to that faster, and at minimum through CES, hopefully we'll share what those options are. And there may not be any, but I think we deserve the right, and the citizens here deserve the right to understand what all those options are. And it could be that IMEA could be the best partner for us that balances both that longer term journey and also the right price and reliability at the same time. It's TBD, but I feel like that's just the undercurrent that sort of exists in the community, and there's a lot of perception to overcome. And as you know, perception is people's reality.
Right. Thank you.
That's it.
That's it? About?
Yeah, I have no question. I have no question at this.
Oh, you have no question? Okay. Go ahead.
I certainly don't envy the task of trying to be carbon-free by 2050. I mean, it's the world of the unknown from what I can gather, right? I mean, so a couple of questions for you. Just one is, how is the IMEA doing in following CEJA, I mean, what's the target you guys are at right now versus, say, statewide? How is the state doing in meeting CEJA goals as far as being carbon-free or green, renewable, et cetera? That's one question. The other thing I had was just thinking about the marketplace in general. I mean, you guys are out trying to build an asset stack by 2050 that's going to be, you know, all renewable. And I'm just curious to know, from where I sit in the world that I live in, trying to find partners outside of 2030 is a challenge because they don't understand the world either. So I'm just curious to know, you know, what conversations you guys having, say, for example, like with Constellation and maybe doing a long-term supply contract to bridge the gap between 2035 and 2050 with supply? Are they willing to have that conversation with you and put a number on it? Because I think, you know, we're talking about cost reliability, we're talking about a lot of things, but I'm just curious to know, what are you getting as far as feedback from filling in the gaps from a cost perspective? And how do we make that decision to say, ratepayers, yeah, you're going to be at, you know, 10-cent power this year, but by 2035, you're going to be at 15 cents. By 2050, you're going to be at 20 cents. You know, these are the things I think the ratepayers ultimately want to know. So.
I'll tackle the first part of your question, and then I'll let Rakesh take the second part. But you had asked about where we're at with regards to the renewable percentage goals as compared to the rest of the state. So the way that it works is the state is currently at roughly 7% renewable through their renewable portfolio standard. That is, we are at IMEA are at 11%. The state will tell you that they're contracted to be closer to 11 to 15, you know, once everything, they're contracted, but they're not online yet. In similar scenario with our contracts, Bee Hollow, et cetera, we'll be at 20%, right? So we're ahead of where the state is as far as meeting the renewable portfolio standard. I think that kind of gives you a sense of how difficult it is to get these percentages, right? Because, again, you're putting on, it's not even necessarily how much is in your portfolio, it's how much energy you're producing, right? And those resources don't produce as much energy because they are weather dependent. So lots of pieces to that, but we are doing better than the state is right now as far as the renewable portfolio standard, if that makes sense.
So when you go live on the new solar, you'll be closer to 20%?
Yes.
Okay, of total consumption, basically.
Correct.
Okay.
And then
And then you had a generic question on Youngstown. Roughly, we have 30 gigawatts of nuclear in PJM. Obviously, you mentioned data centers, and I think they have moved to a thought process where I think wind and solar are not necessarily sufficient, so you're going to hear more and more deals. One of the advantages that they have is your nuclear runs flat, meaning it perfectly aligns with your data center versus your load following. So that's why they have a tendency to, you know, just with the demand, and they like the customers with that sort of load profile, and that's what you're hearing. And that's why it's difficult to where they're not even considering, you know, I mean, you either do 20-year deals, life of the plant, versus, hey, 50, 100 megawatts. I mean, that's the difficulty we are having.
So right now, I think you said you had a deal with like Constellation for some supply and also some capacity. That expires in 2030 or 2025? I can't remember when. I mean,
2026.
2026. I mean, so what do you do to fill the gap? I mean, you know, in the near term to make sure that reliability is still being met and there's, you know, cost mitigations are putting in place and not leaving yourself completely exposed to what is ultimately going to end up being a pretty tight market as more and more data centers come on. So how do you plan to address that?
So we continue to talk with other developers in the region. Some of them we have, at least in MISO, in the short term, we have an advantage where the accreditation is a little bit high for the next 2 to 3 years before you have the new rules kick in. So we are looking for those opportunities, to try to contract with a larger set of pool, even though the net capacity is much
I'm
smaller.
just, I mean, are you finding that those offers are few and far between at this point? I mean, if
Oh, yeah, I mean, on the PJM capacity side, it's pretty much,
I mean,
there's significant volatility. You're trying to look for opportunities where,
so so in other words, the more knowns that the city of Naperville can have today, the better off they're gonna be, 10, 15, 20, 25 years down the road versus, I mean, and this is near term, 2026 even, is gonna cause potentially some rate hikes.
well, but at the same time, you understood, I don't think anybody is building a new nuclear right now. You understood? All of that capacity is being gobbled up through some of the data center demand. Again, then you have aging of coal fleet within the Eastern PJM footprint. You understood? These are 35, 40, 45 to 55 years old. So you're shrinking your supply at a faster pace. So I don't think, at least in the near term, you will have less options, not more. That's just my opinion. And I think you'll probably hear that from others as well.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes, I earlier alluded to the increases in capacity prices that are starting in June of this year. Correct me if I'm wrong, but capacity prices reflect an outlook 3 years out when the auction is held about how much power is going to be available to fill the gaps, right?
That's correct.
So that number went up 800% just from last year.
Yeah.
Do you agree that that's a price signal of an early price signal of where things are going in the future? For example, it's $269 in June. If shortages continue, could that number be $400 in June of 26, $600 in June of 27? Those capacity auctions are very telling about not only what's happening right now, but what's going on in the future.
Yeah.
Because that's where they're oriented towards.
Yeah.
So
you already have those prices in Eastern PJM footprint,
Right.
and it's just that the load growth that we are seeing is in AEP territory. Again, this is based on your projected. I'd strongly encourage you to look at the year-over-year load growth projections that PJM publishes each year. Look at last year's report. Even ComEd. There are public statements that we are starting to see load growth in single to double digits.
And as I understand it, the RTO has even received a lot of criticism about that capacity price out east. It was even worse out in Baltimore or the Maryland area. It went up to $440-some.
Yeah.
And PJM kind of backed off and put a cap on that, which, of course, eliminates the reason for having an auction, which is to, incent generation to be built. You put a cap on something, you're not going to get the same result if you don't have a cap. So I think that's in line with my thinking, that prices are really going to take off soon. Now I have a completely different question, different subject matter. If Naperville drops out of your portfolio, I understand we're like 30% of your load. Are you out of the business of trying to procure power in the future? Are you done with that then? Where do you sit with your length versus short of power if Naperville drops out with your two coal plants and whatever you got in your portfolio
so
now?
Right now we optimize our resources. PJM and MISO dispatch these. From a supply perspective, I think we are in a much, even with the reductions in CJ and those things, we'll be in a much better position, especially with the volatility and things that are out there.
So will you be long power if Naperville drops out?
Slightly long.
Slightly long. So you'll be kind of in balance.
Yeah.
So your life would get a lot easier if Naperville wasn't part of your portfolio. You wouldn't have to go out and buy any more resources, right?
Probably my staff is not here. Probably my staff would feel that way.
All right.
No, again, it's just the complexity that we are entering in. It's the difficulty to do that. Obviously, Naperville is a very valued customer against it. We would like to have the city do good and continue to be part of IMEA.
I'm last. I'm here now, and I had to change some of my questions. But kind of following up with some of my colleagues here are saying, is it fair to say basically that IMEA is using its resources from the participants that are participating with you to develop and purchase renewable energy? I mean, for the future. And that if we aren't part of it, then your resources for that go down. And again, part of it is you still pay the bills. You're not-for-profit. You just pay the bills. You don't have to worry about us anymore. So it doesn't hurt you, but it does hurt people that want to promote the development of renewable energy, or at least the idea within this state.
Yes, and as we were giving the example of Bee Hollow, it wouldn't have happened had the 25 members not extended the contracts.
Well, in 2030.
Yeah.
And in 2030, when we have our Lee DeKalb contract that
Right.
currently expire, that has to be replaced. You understand?
Right.
Nobody's going to do a 5-year deal.
And
Right.
if IMEA is, or excuse me, if Naperville's not there, we'll have to assess, do we need to replace that resource
Right.
at that point in time, or would we be long, right? So there's a lot of decisions here,
Yeah, it changes the whole
changes the whole dynamic.
of it. So as I'm hearing, and I'm still weighing, because I want to gather all the evidence, and we're still in a evidentiary gathering mode, that the PUAB is, because we're going to find out some more next week.
Right.
To help the transition, where I hear everybody's concerned about, and rightfully so, the transition. It's kind of difficult to transition if you don't have those resources. And I think to understand the reality is that we all can't just change to carbonless with a snap of a finger. And regardless of when we start, you know, we can't say anything, we didn't start soon enough. That's water over the dam. So we have to think about, for us as a city and for us as a PUAB board, to determine what's best for Naperville, and yes, what's best for the world, but we only have a certain impact on the rest of the world that makes any sense. And all of us are talking to other people and other experts in climate and in a number of other areas. I don't want to just listen to one person. I want to listen, and I want to have a group of people explain this to me. So if we have a good deal right now, to me, now I'm not promoting it, I'm not saying that, I'm asking as a rhetorical question, if we have a good deal right now, and I'm hearing questions that are saying, holy smoke, we're all kind of facing a tough situation because the law in Illinois is going to require natural gas electric generation to shut down in 5 years. So things are going to get tougher, not easier. And we're finding out some of our alternative renewable energies aren't as Nate was talking, strong, you know, however you want to talk about energy, because it's not on all the time. Right now, we have that. So when people say with cars, I'm going to be renewable. Not everybody's driving an electric car here. And not everybody charges their electric car from solar or wind power. I mean, and I'm not calling them hypocrites. I'm just saying there's only so much we can do in this environment that we're in. And we're trying to do the best we can to understand where we're going.
Right.
And it seems like you've talked about transition a lot. This is where you're going. And we need to have gas in our car to go there until we all have an electric car. But then that electric car has to be charged. I mean, there's only so many things you could do that are practical. So it's kind of like I asked you a question in that, but I'm kind of following through and looking for a nodding head or not, or saying, no, you're wrong. You know, is this correct or not?
No, that's correct. I mean, and that's what we were talking about, is that while I know people are frustrated and want us to move faster, having some thermal in your resource plan will help you get you through some of these volatile years, so that then really the innovation and some of these new technologies should begin to develop and become more cost effective, and we're able to take advantage of them at that time. Many of them are not there yet. So it really does kind of position well, and that is the thought process.
Well, yeah, you can only do so much. Now, there was a public meeting a few weeks ago in this very room where a concern was expressed that Naperville's association with IMEA is contributing to global warming. If Naperville fails to renew the contract with IMEA, will Prairie State or Trimble County shut down their operations in the near future or any time prior to 2045 at the end of their generating life of their plants? In other words, will there be a change in CO2 emissions into the atmosphere if Naperville does not renew its contract?
No.
Do we make any difference other than we feel good, we did that, but all of our residents here are going to pay a financial price? Some people will be gladly to do that, and I think Naperville is going to offer them that opportunity. But there are a lot of people that say, I don't want to do that. And I think we have to consider other people, the whole group, what's going on here in Naperville.
So I could give you a really complex answer to that, okay? But I think the simple answer is that whether Naperville's with IMEA or not, Prairie State will still be running. And even if IMEA wasn't with Prairie State would still be running. So because it's owned by, we're only 15%, we're minority owner. So
Yes.
Same, we're a minority owner in Trimble County as well. That's a very simplified answer. I can see, if you want the more complicated answer, you know, of all the interrelations of the percentages and all that stuff.
Then you can ask Troy.
We could go through it. I don't think that's what you're necessarily asking right now, but we'd be happy to provide it if you're interested.
No, you answered where I was going with this. The one other concern that I see in this discussion, and Naperville's no different than any other place, is that people will use their feelings and maybe facts to prove a point. However, not everybody's that way, and some people use terms, use examples that mislead other people. So there was a concern raised at a community-led forum that Naperville has to be mindful, or should be mindful, and concerned for the citizens of the communities where the coal-fired plants operate. And this person said, do the residents who live in the communities where Prairie State and Trimble County operate consider the plants to be an asset or threats? Now, yes, I'm from Gary, Indiana, and I probably would have been 6'4" if I didn't live there when I was growing up with the pollution that was going on. However, that was money for people. I'm not talking about just money. How do people feel? I'm sure you're very community oriented as a organization. What do the people there feel in both those communities where the coal-fired plant is?
So, I mean, that's a good question. I have visited there multiple times, so I've heard directly from the people who work there. This plant is an extremely rural area. I mean, you're driving there, you're seeing very, very few homes, very, very few. It is a very rural area.
I've been there. I know where it is.
There are 650 well-paying jobs between the coal plant and the mine. And these are really good jobs for the Southern Illinois communities. And they have done an estimate, this is Prairie State's information, not mine, that I think it's roughly $700 and some million of economic impact to the state. And certainly locally, as you can imagine, they're a substantial tax district for them down there. They also employ, because of the outages, they're planned outages, right? So every other year they go through these large outages. They bring in a huge amount of union workers, roughly 1,000 union workers. workforce from the region there to help for the outages, the planned ones, and then, of course, there are occasionally unplanned outages as well. So a real source of revenue for the community. I'm from Southern Illinois originally, and I think that's the way to view it. I'm just offering my opinion, of course, but you are all more than welcome to take a tour and see it for yourself if you're interested in learning the details and talking to folks yourself as well.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that. I'd like to, are there any other questions that we have? Oh, yeah, sure, yes, sorry. Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay, so I wasn't sure if I'd be allowed to ask a question, but there's this one specific point, it's kind of minor. So as of right now, I am not an adult, I don't pay electricity, so a 25% decrease in rates doesn't really excite me, but I'm sure that in 5 years it would. So I was just noticing there's this sort of overlap in dates. I think it was on the resource transitioning has started slide that says that you guys are committed to transitioning and replacing fossil sources with renewable ones and by 2035, and you also stated that by 2035 your debt would be paid off, which would result in the reduction of rates. So I was just wondering, like, as a casual observer, it seems that from the discourse, the only way to like offset the reduction in capacity from fossil fuels would be to build more renewable, which we also stated isn't as efficient as the carbon it's replacing. Do you guys have that like in your budget to just build more, or would you have to send out more bonds and incur more debt to build the new plants, if that makes sense?
Yeah, those are good questions.
Yeah, very good.
Really impressive questions. So all things being equal, that 25%, like we said, you're paying it right now. It goes away. It's out of the budget. As far as debt, that would be a decision of the board. So if the IMEA wanted to buy and own our solar or wind or whatever resource we decided on ourselves, then we would go out and we would, do bonding for that. But if we do it through a power purchase agreement, which is another tool we can use, then you don't need to do that. That's pretty highly simple. Did I get anything incorrect? But that's kind of the big picture concept there as far as the debt. And all again, those decisions are made by the board, right? So your city has that direct input in those decisions. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, I was just about to add, you can either build those Youngstead or you can enter into PPA agreements. Historically, tax credits, Youngstead as a nonprofit, we couldn't access to those, but IRA changed that. We now have access, but there are a bunch of rules and restrictions around that. So.
Okay.
Yeah, good questions.
Oh, thank you.
I did have a question about one of the graphs from earlier. Okay. I did have a question about one of the graphs from earlier on slide 4. I was looking at how in 2022, 2023, and 2024, the transmission cost was higher, I believe. I just was wondering why that was.
Yeah.
So transmission, this is regulated by FERC. What they do is, for example, if like ComEd invests, let's say, $100 million in a project, it goes through a rulemaking and they come up with a rate. What's happening is, traditionally what we had is you had large generation stations trying to serve load. We are moving away from that, and you're having multiple smaller units. So you need to really build out that network. As a result, there's a lot of investment going into those kind of infrastructure. So that's why you are going to continue to see increase in transmission rates moving forward. Okay. Again, that's the same rate whether we serve Naperville or Naperville is served by any other supplier. That's through ComEd. Obviously, as a utility, we are actively looking at ways to mitigate that, including opportunities in transmission ownership. So.
Thank you.
If I may, I thought you were asking why they were lower in those years.
They looked like they were higher in those years compared to previously.
Okay. I say there was one year where we got a benefit from some things that Rakesh does with instruments that are called ARRs and FTRs. And because we made some really good trading decisions in that one year, the transmission was significantly reduced that year. But for the other years, the increases, I give a report. Some people in the audience here know that because they sit in on our meetings. I give a report every year on what Ameren's doing with their costs. And as far back as I can remember, 5 or 6 years, Ameren's rates have gone up 20% or roughly 20% every year for at least the last 6 years. ComEd's haven't done that much, but with Exelon divesting the generation and separating from Constellation, we would expect that they would start following some of the trends that Ameren's following as well, and that's why we think the transmission costs are going to continue to go up.
Very nice. Jim?
Yeah, slightly different topic, but I'll go back to questions I asked earlier that in 2035, when the bonds expire, the price of power from Prairie State will be $30 plus whatever inflation happens between now and then. Call it 40, I don't know, whatever number you want to use. The solar honeybee, is that the name of it?
Bee Hollow.
Or bee,
They're all rivers
Bee Hollow.
and it's prairies and
okay,
yeah.
Bee Hollow's at $70 a megawatt, fixed for 20 years. So in that scenario, Bee Hollow is more expensive than what Prairie State will be in 2035. The developers of Bee Hollow received very significant investment tax credits, production tax credits, renewable energy credits that all subsidized the cost of that solar farm. There's a new administration who's very hostile towards the renewable energy space. Those type of tax credits, investment tax credits, renewable credits may not exist in the future. Do you agree with my assessment that the administration being more hostile to this industry may make getting a similar